They thought she was just another woman in the wrong neighborhood. They thought the uniform in her back meant nothing outside of a base. On a gray Thursday morning in Atlanta, two officers from the Fulton County Sheriff's Department made a decision they could never take back. They saw a black woman sitting in a parked car outside a private school, and they saw a problem. What they didn't see, what they refused to see, was the silver eagle on the collar of the jacket folded neatly on the passenger seat. They didn't know that the woman they were about to humiliate was Colonel Adrienne Mangwandi Cross, United States Army, decorated combat veteran, recipient of the Legion of Merit, and the highest-ranking officer at Fort Gilliam's Regional Command Liaison Office. They were about to find out. The morning had started the way most of Colonel Mangwandi Cross's mornings started when she wasn't on base, quietly, with coffee she made herself, black, no sugar, in the kitchen of the modest three-bedroom house in East Point she'd owned for 11 years. She wasn't a woman who needed noise to feel alive. 31 years in the Army had taught her that silence was a gift. She had risen at 5:15, the same as always, force of habit more than necessity. Her daughter Camille's graduation ceremony at Lakeview Preparatory Academy didn't start until 9, but the colonel had learned long ago that arriving early was a form of respect for the occasion, for the people involved, and for herself. She had dressed carefully, not in uniform. This was her daughter's day, not hers, but she had pressed her slacks the night before, chosen a silk blouse the color of deep burgundy, and draped a blazer over the back seat. The jacket with her insignia was folded on the passenger seat. Old instinct. You never leave rank behind, even when you're not wearing it. She pulled into the school side lot at 8:12, a full 40 minutes before any other parents were expected. The lot was mostly empty. She parked under a magnolia tree, rolled down the window 2 inches to let the morning air in, and sat with her coffee thermos in her lap, watching a groundskeeper trim the hedges along the front walk. She wasn't on her phone. She wasn't doing anything suspicious. She was a mother waiting to watch her daughter walk across a stage. That was all. The cruiser pulled in 7 minutes later. It came slow, the way cruisers always do when they've already decided something before they've confirmed anything. It parked diagonally behind her vehicle, not blocking her in, but angled in a way that said the option existed. 2 deputies climbed out. The one in front was a broad man, with a jaw like a brick and the walk of someone who had never once questioned his own judgment. His nameplate read, T. Gruber. The one behind him was younger, maybe 26, with eyes that kept darting to his senior partner for cues. His nameplate read, M. Osei. Gruber rapped on the driver's window with his knuckle. Not a knock, a rap. The kind used to startle. Colonel Mangwandi Cross lowered the window the rest of the way without rushing. She had been in enough tense situations, rooms full of hostile actors, forward operating bases where the wrong move got people killed, to know that composure was armor. She kept her hands visible on the thermos and looked up at Gruber evenly. "Good morning," she said. "What are you doing in this lot?" Gruber asked. No greeting. No sir or ma'am. His eyes moved over the inside of her car, the way hands rifle through a stranger's bag. "Waiting for my daughter's graduation ceremony," the colonel said. "It starts at 9. This lot's for staff and authorized vehicles. The school sent a parking notice to all parents attending the ceremony. I have it in my email if you'd like to see it." Gruber's jaw shifted. "I'd like to see some ID." Mangwandi Cross studied him for 1 measured second. Then she reached, slowly, deliberately, the way you reach when someone's hand is near a holster, into her center console and produced her driver's license. She held it out through the window. Gruber took it without looking at it. He was looking at her, at the car, at the jacket on the passenger seat, which he glanced at and dismissed the way people dismiss things they don't understand. "You live around here?" he asked. "East Point." Long drive for a school parking lot. "It's 9 minutes, she said. "I checked." Something in her tone, not disrespectful, not heated, simply factual, seemed to irritate Gruber in a way he couldn't name. He handed the license to Osei without looking away from her. "Run it," he said. Osei took the license back to the cruiser. Gruber leaned against the doorframe of her car, not standing back, leaning, taking up space in the way that some men do when they want you to feel the imbalance of power without them having to say a word about it. "You been here long?" he asked. "About 8 minutes. Anyone from the school verify you're supposed to be here?" The colonel tilted her head very slightly. "The email from the school verifying that is on my phone. The ceremony is on the school's public calendar. My daughter's name is in the program. I can show you any of those things." A pause. "Would any of those things be helpful?" Gruber's eyes hardened. He didn't like the cadence of her answers. Too steady, too precise. She wasn't fumbling, wasn't apologizing, wasn't performing the nervous deference he was accustomed to extracting from people in this exact situation. "Step out of the vehicle," he said. The colonel looked at him with the expression of a person who has heard a great many unreasonable orders in her life and has learned to evaluate each one without emotion before responding. "I'm sorry, on what basis?" "I'd like to speak with you outside the vehicle." "You're speaking with me now. I'm not obstructing anything. I'm not suspected of anything. I'm waiting for a school ceremony." She kept her hands visible. "I'd prefer to remain in the vehicle." Gruber straightened up. He crossed his arms. "Ma'am, I'm going to ask you one more time to step outside." What happened next would later be a matter of great significance in the internal affairs report, the civil rights investigation, and the press conference held on the steps of the Fulton County Courthouse. What happened was this. The colonel stepped out of the car. She did it calmly, without argument, setting her thermos on the seat and unfolding herself from the car with the unhurried dignity of someone who has stood at attention in front of generals and never once flinched. She was tall, 5'11", and she stood straight in the way that the army builds into people over decades. She did not raise her voice. She did not make any sudden movements. She simply stood beside her car, in the morning sun, in a private school parking lot, while a county deputy talked at her about the suspicion of trespassing. From the cruiser, OC's radio crackled. He leaned in to listen. Something changed in his posture immediately. He straightened up from the car door and looked at the license in his hand again. Then he looked at his partner. "Gruber," OC called out. "In a minute," Gruber said, still facing the colonel. "Gruber," OC said again, and something in his voice made the older deputy turn. OC was holding the license and looking at something on the MDT screen inside the cruiser with an expression that combined confusion and the specific pallor of a man who has just realized the ground beneath him is not solid. "What?" Gruber said, walking toward him. OC kept his voice low, but the parking lot was quiet and sound carries in open spaces. There's a military record attached. Active duty 06. He looked up. "That's a full colonel, man." Gruber stared at the screen. He said nothing for several seconds. "That doesn't change the situation." "She's with the Army Liaison Office," OC continued, reading. "Fort Gillem Command Staff. She's still in a restricted lot, without." "Gruber." OC's voice had dropped to something careful and deliberate. "The lot isn't restricted. The school sent a mass email to parents. She told you that." There was a silence between the two deputies that lasted exactly long enough for every subsequent investigation to note it as the moment when one officer understood and the other chose not to. Gruber walked back toward the colonel. His posture had changed, not softened exactly, but recalibrated, the way people recalibrate when they realize the leverage has shifted and they don't know yet how to account for it. "It seems your record checks out," he said. Colonel Monkey Cross looked at him with the patience of a woman who had spent 31 years being twice as prepared as everyone around her and half as acknowledged for it. "I know it does," she said. "You're free to wait for the ceremony. I'm aware of that too." She reached into the passenger seat and picked up the folded jacket. She shook it out with a single crisp snap of her wrist and put it on. The silver eagle on the collar caught the morning sun with the exactness of something that had always been there, had always been true, and had simply been waiting for someone to look at it properly. She buttoned one button, picked up her thermos, and turned toward the school entrance. She stopped walking after 3 steps. She turned back. "Deputy," she said, not unkindly, not triumphantly, with the same measured factual weight she had used for every word since the cruiser pulled in. "My name is Colonel Adrian Mwangi Cross. I command the Regional Logistics Support Division at Fort Gillem. I have served this country for 31 years. I have been deployed 3 times to active combat zones. I have buried people I was responsible for. A pause that had the weight of all of those years in it. And I am going to watch my daughter graduate this morning. Have a good day. She walked into the school. She did not look back again. What she didn't see, what she was not there to witness, was what happened next in that parking lot. But Deputy OC would describe it in his report and later in his testimony with a clarity that suggested the image had been pressed into his memory with some force. Gruber stood in the lot for a long moment after the colonel walked through the front doors of the school. He stood with his thumbs in his belt, the way he always stood, and he looked at the door she had walked through, and his jaw worked silently at something. Then he looked at the jacket she had been wearing. Then he looked at OC. She could have just said she was military, Gruber said. OC stared at him. She told you she was a parent waiting for a graduation. She showed you her license. She offered to show you the school's email. He paused. What else should she have had to say? Gruber had no answer for that. He walked back to the cruiser and got in. Inside the school, Colonel Mungie-Cross found a seat in the second row of the auditorium and watched the graduating class of Lakeview Preparatory file onto the stage. When Camille crossed the stage, in her cap and gown, 22 years old, heading to Emory in the fall on a merit scholarship, the colonel stood up. She clapped. She let out a single long breath that carried 31 years of sacrifice, of early mornings and long deployments and choices made alone in distant places, so that this moment could exist. She did not cry until the lights went down for the slideshow. And even then, quietly, the way she did most things. She did not know, sitting in that auditorium, that Deputy OC had already made a call from the parking lot. He had called the watch commander on his personal cell phone, not the official line, and he had described what had happened and asked quietly and directly whether a report was something he should be filing. The watch commander told him yes. Within 2 hours, the interaction had been reviewed by the Internal Affairs Division of the Fulton County Sheriff's Department. By the time the colonel was eating lunch with Camille at a restaurant in Decatur, her phone had received a message from the Fort Gillem drag office informing her that they had been made aware of an incident and asking if she wished to proceed with a formal complaint. She stared at the message for a moment. Then she looked at her daughter across the table. Camille laughing at something on her phone, 22 years old and free and brilliant. And the colonel typed back one word. Yes. What followed moved with a speed that surprised people who didn't understand how institutions work when they are suddenly afraid of what they've allowed. The Internal Affairs report was completed in 72 hours. Deputy T. Gruber was placed on administrative leave, pending review. His personnel file, once it was opened in the context of a formal inquiry, revealed 4 prior complaints of unlawful stops over a 6-year period, 3 of which had been filed by black residents, and all of which had been administratively closed without consequence. The pattern, documented in the IA report, with the dispassion of bureaucratic language that somehow made it worse, was undeniable. The sheriff of Fulton County held a press conference. He stood at the podium outside the courthouse with the expression of a man who understood that what he said next would matter. And he said that the department extended its apology to Colonel Mungie-Cross and her family, that the conduct described in the incident report did not reflect the values the department aspired to, and that structural changes to how stop and identify situations were handled and reviewed would be implemented immediately. He announced that a civilian oversight panel would be given binding authority to review complaints filed by community members, something that had been proposed and tabled twice in the previous 4 years. None of that was shown on the news segment that most people saw. What was shown, what spread across platforms within 48 hours of being posted, was a clip from outside the school, captured on a parent's phone. It was 23 seconds long. It showed the colonel putting on the jacket with the silver eagle. It showed her stopping and turning back. It showed her saying something to Gruber that couldn't be heard clearly. And it showed her walking into the school with the unhurried certainty of someone who had decided, long before that morning, that the world did not get to make her small. The caption on the most shared version read, "She spent 31 years serving the country. She just wanted to watch her daughter graduate." 40 million people watched it in 3 days. In the weeks after, Colonel Mungie-Cross gave one interview. She sat across from a journalist in a quiet office at Fort Gillem, and she was asked how she had remained so calm in that parking lot. She was quiet for a moment before she answered. I wasn't calm because I wasn't angry, she said. I was calm because I'd been doing this longer than he's been a deputy. I've had to be twice as prepared, twice as composed, twice as unassailable every single day for 31 years. And I decided a long time ago that I was not going to let someone's bad decision on a bad morning take that from me. She paused. He made a mistake. He's going to live with it. I went to my daughter's graduation. She was asked if she thought anything would actually change. She looked at the journalist with the steadiness of someone who had seen a great many things that didn't change and had kept working anyway. I think the question isn't whether things change, she said. I think the question is whether we stop accepting the world as it is when we know exactly what it ought to be. I filed the complaint. That's my answer. Deputy Gruber was ultimately terminated from the Fulton County Sheriff's Department. The termination came not from the parking lot incident alone, but from the aggregate record uncovered during the review. The pattern of stops, the ignored complaints, the documented gap between the conduct the department claimed to hold and the conduct it had, in practice, protected. Osei received a formal commendation for his actions and remained on the force. He was later moved to a community engagement role he had been requesting for 2 years. Camille Mwandi Cross started at Emory in September. She was studying public policy. When a reporter asked her, at a campus event in the fall, what had shaped her understanding of justice, she said this: "My mother's whole life, but if you need a specific example, ask her about the morning of my graduation. Some people carry their rank openly, so everyone around them understands the order of things. Some people fold it neatly on the passenger seat and wait to see whether the world will require them to unfold it. Colonel Adrienne Mwandi Cross has spent 31 years knowing exactly who she is, with or without the jacket. The only person in that parking lot who didn't know it, the only one who refused to find out, was the one who ended up losing everything." Deputy Gruber had one job that morning: check the facts before you act on your assumptions. He had every opportunity to do it, and he chose not to. And the system that had protected that choice for 6 years finally ran out of room to hide it. The badge is supposed to stand for something. When the person wearing it forgets what that something is, they don't just lose the badge, they lose the argument they've been making their whole career about why they deserved it. If this story made you feel something, anger or recognition or the stubborn belief that accountability is still possible, then share it. Leave a comment below and tell us, when you saw that colonel put on her jacket and walk through that door, what did you feel? And if you haven't already, subscribe. Because the stories we tell about justice are the ones that remind us what it's supposed to look like. We'll see you in the next one. I keep coming back to that moment in the parking lot. The one where she shook out that jacket and put it on. One crisp snap of her wrist. Like she'd been waiting for it, not out of anger, but out of something quieter and more permanent than anger. That image stays with me because it says everything about what kind of person Colonel Adrienne Mwandi Cross had chosen to become over 31 years, and everything about what Deputy Gruber had chosen not to be in 6. Here's what I think about when I think about this story. Gruber didn't just make a mistake in that parking lot. He revealed a habit. And habits like his don't appear out of nowhere. They get built, slowly, over years of being allowed to act without consequence. 4 prior complaints, 3 of them from black residents. All of them closed without action. That's not a system failing once. That's a system making a choice, over and over again, to protect one kind of person at the expense of another. And what happens when you're never made to account for your choices? You stop believing you ever will be. You stop even checking. That's what I saw in Gruber's face when he took her license without looking at it. He wasn't even curious. He had already decided. What undoes that kind of arrogance is not rage. It's precision. It's the ability to stay completely clear-headed in a moment designed to make you fall apart. The colonel didn't shout. She didn't escalate. She answered every question with exactly as much information as was true and necessary. And she held her ground without giving anyone a reason to say she hadn't. That takes something most people don't talk about enough. Not just courage, but a disciplined intelligence, the kind you build when you've had to be twice as prepared as everyone else for 3 decades. She knew the parking notice existed. She knew her rights. She knew exactly what was happening and exactly how to move through it without giving an inch of herself away. That's not luck, that's a mind that has been sharpened on hard situations and never allowed to get dull. And then there's what she did after. She filed the complaint. One word. Yes. I think about that a lot. She could have let it go. She had a daughter's graduation. She had a full career's worth of reasons to decide that one bad morning wasn't worth the paperwork, but she didn't let it go, and I think the reason she didn't is the same reason she had survived everything else that came before it. She understood that walking away without accountability doesn't just leave the problem standing. It hands it to the next person. Maybe someone without her rank, maybe someone without her 31 years of knowing exactly who they are when someone tries to tell them otherwise. That's the part of this story I want to sit with. Not just the justice of the outcome. Gruber terminated, the oversight panel granted binding authority, the system finally forced to look at itself. But the reason the outcome was possible at all. One woman who refused to be made small. One younger deputy who asked a quiet question to his watch commander instead of following the easier path. Two people in the same parking lot who made two completely different choices about what kind of person they were going to be that morning. The consequences flow directly from those choices. They always do. The only variable is how long it takes.